to my channel. I'm Masood Raja, and in this brief video I will talk about the China model and how it is not necessarily a feasible model for any other country, and certainly not for the developing nations. So please watch this video to the end so that you get the whole of my argument and not just the first few minutes. Now, in my conversations with Pakistani friends, and some of them are actually scholars of economy and social sciences, I've heard them say several times that we should follow the China model because it's efficient, and look at how great China has become since the 1980s. But they never really break down what the China model is. So let's look at it from economic point of view as well as from political point of view. From the point of politics, China is supposed to be a communist country because it has a centralized communist party. It's a single party nation. But none of what that communist party does is actually communist. It's not even Maoist anymore. One aspect of the Maoist communism was its extreme reliance on the peasants, but also that the state took care of its people. Any system that claims to be communistic or socialistic must make sure that the property is owned by the state and that the wealth is distributed evenly. There is no room in the communist system of immense wealth getting accrued to the top, right? So it's not necessarily a communist regime. It's more a totalitarian regime run by one single party, and which has its own party elite, its own hierarchy, and people by and large have no say in how the people get elected or how their leaders work. So politically, it's simply an autocratic system which has borrowed the name of communism and Chinese Communist Party, but it's basically a dictatorship, right? Dictatorship of the elite. Now, economically, what was the Chinese miracle? Did they come up with new commodities and dump the market? Yes. But the way they attracted global investment wasn't because they were too innovative. It was because they could keep the price of labor controlled. So what China has done since the 1980s is provided massive numbers of captive labor. Labor that has no rights, that cannot unionize, right? And that cannot even follow the natural process of capitalization, where over a period when labor starts working in factories, they build solidarities, they unionize, and then they fight to raise their price. None of those possibilities are available in China for workers, right? They are housed in these massive apartment complexes and they have no rights. And that's the ideal kind of captive labor that global corporations look for. I mean, if you look at the reason why global corporations relocate from one place to another, it's always about the price of labor. And you can watch my video on how labor still produces value. So if you look at the movement of American industry in the United States itself, they first moved from Union-heavy territories in the north to the American south looking for cheap labor. But in China, they found an ideal place because labor is kept cheap. And it's kept cheap because labor, first of all, has no rights, and then it cannot develop through solidarities, through developing their own labor movement structures, and through unions. So you have this perpetual state kept by the state, millions of people who work for whatever wages you give them, and the only protections available to them are the protections that their government might afford them. So that's how China keeps its labor cheap. And most of the times these workers are not even provided any subsidy or care or health care by the state. So what China then has created is a monstrosity of a system in which it is supposed to be communist, but it's not taking care of its people because most of the things are privatized. workers are supposed to have a say in how they are governed. I mean, after all, if it's really a communist state, the workers should own the mode of production. That absolutely has not happened. So there is this huge elite and massive number of workers who are kept in precarious conditions, and then global corporations are invited, right, to make use of that cheap labor. So in a way, the China model then is capture a large segment of your society, take away their rights or their possibilities of building lateral solidarities, and then offer their labor to the global industries to come and build their assembly lines in your country. That's the China model, right? Now, granted, China has been able to accumulate a lot of wealth, right? But look at the cost to the people of China of that wealth. How many of them have been dislocated? Another thing, politically, I mean, Pakistan is a great ally of China, so they cannot afford to say anything critical. These are the same Pakistani leaders who will criticize Israeli actions against Palestinians. They would sometimes dare to criticize some actions by Saudi Arabia against the Yemenis, but nothing is coming out against what China is doing to its own Muslim population, right? They are living in internment camps, right? A massive number of people. So that is the China model. Exploitation of your own workers, keeping your labor force cheap, and not allowing them to organize, right? So that global corporations find your place attractive enough to bring their manufacturing there. That's why there is a term now called the China price. You know, when American corporations or American businesses go and acquire things, they ask people, can you beat the China price? And of course, no one can beat the China price, because not many nations on this planet keep a huge number of its people as captive labor, as labor without rights, right? Because labor, naturally, if you work in a factory, eventually you will enter politics and you will then fight for your rights. After all, that's the argument that the neoliberal economists give, that no, we don't exploit people. If we go and take our industry somewhere looking for cheap labor, eventually the standard of life of those people is raised, and that's why industry moves on. But no one is moving on from China because there is no other place that provides labor that's fixed in its place. Now, you know, people can argue that China has a huge population and they need a particular system to govern themselves. That's fine. But anytime someone invokes the term that we should have a China model, we should keep in mind that they're talking about an undemocratic system of government in which people have no say in electing their own leaders, where people don't have many rights, and where majority of the population that works in the factories is absolutely silenced, controlled, monitored, and that it's also a nation that's keeping hundreds of thousands of its Muslim citizens in internment camps, in so-called re-education camps. That's the China model. Okay, now look at your own country. If you're from Pakistan, India, elsewhere, and ask yourself, can you really replicate that model in your own country? And if you do, what kind of a political system will emerge out of it, right? And what kind of a labor force you will create? Because you will have to do that if you want to emulate the China model. So these are some of my words on the so-called China model of politics and economy. I could clearly understand the rise of China. I think it's a good thing politically to have another global power, but that doesn't mean that I will become an apologist for a repressive system which neither lives up to its own ideals of Marxism and communism, and nor delivers the liberating aspects of high capitalistic society in which at least the workers have a choice, right? So I hope this clarifies certain things. Thank you so much for joining me here. And I know this channel is not very large or is not attracting a lot of people, but the reason I created it is so that I can share my political commentaries and political thoughts on a separate channel other than Post-Colonial Space, which is my educational channel. So thank you so much for joining me. Please do subscribe if you feel like it, and I will see you next time with another brief video on some US, Pakistan, or world issue. Thank you, and peace and love.